In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why if the Pelicans want to be competitive next season, they have to get a dominant point guard next to Zion Williamson. It's the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Monday, we're going to take a little bit of a break from Joe Dumars stuff, but I want to focus on some team building aspects for next season, and that's looking at the point guard position. I've got some data behind this, but the Pelicans basically need to get a high-level starting point guard in some capacity next to Zion Williamson next season if they want to be competitive, and I'll explain why. But they also could trade Zion Williamson, and Portland is a team that really could be ready to line up a move, and I'll break down what a potential trade would look like and why it's pretty interesting as I sneeze here. For the team, because it could reshape the Pelicans and send them in a different direction that makes a lot of sense while still keeping them pretty competitive. And then we'll look at a couple of really interesting draft prospects coming up in the third part of today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console required. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. So let's get into this one. I was intrigued by looking at some lineup data over the weekend when it comes to building around Zion Williamson and, what's conceivably this team's ceiling should they kind of run it back, right? They won 49 games a year ago, lost Jonas Valanciunas, that was a big loss, and Dyson Daniels, and Larry Nance Jr., but we had pretty high hopes coming into the season with DeJounte Murray in tow, Yves Missi as your, center, and trying to figure out what you could do there, and then any sort of deal around, Brandon Ingram. The team had enough talent to be competitive. It was just injuries more than anything else that held them back. There might have been other things that held them back too, but it was injuries which derailed them more. Even when they were healthy, they looked like an okay enough defensive rebounding team that could have been competitive, but injuries derailed them. But when you get into the stuff with Zion Williamson, a lot of talk is made about the center spot, and that is very true, and we'll touch on that in here. But when you look at what he needs, it's not to pair him next to a dominant center. He needs to be playing with a point guard. When you look at the lineup data, and this season's a little wonky, admittedly, it's not a ton of games for folks. When Zion was out there with either DeJounte Murray or Jose Alvarado, the net rating between those guys was really good. The most used lineup for Zion Williamson was DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, and Yves Missi alongside Zion, and it had a positive 13.7 plus 13.7 net rating. When you look at him and DeJounte Murray, it had a net rating of 4.6. Zion Williamson and Jose Alvarado had a positive net rating of 0.2. So when you put those guys out there on the court, Zion basically with another point guard, he did not play with Elfrid Payton at all, actually. This team looked entirely different. And that is interesting to me because if you look at this team trying to be competitive next season, DeJounte Murray is not going to be ready. We're assuming won't be ready for the start of the regular season. And while I love Jose Alvarado, that's someone that is undersized, gets picked on on defense, and you're not going to be able to survive a ton with him as your starter. Impactful guy off the bench, absolutely. But as your starter, not a chance. And, they need to sort that out if they want to make the playoffs next season. If Joe Dumars is coming in and it's like, you're not allowed to rebuild, push for the postseason, go and try and win a title next year without paying the luxury tax, this is, going to be something they need to sort out. And it puts the team in a bad spot. And even if, say, he's back by January 1, DeJounte Murray, is he going to do? And what's the impact he's going to have next season? And look, he's not the most explosive guy. This is not someone whose career is over because of the Achilles injury. This is someone who will be a fine player in the future. His game is not kind of predicated on the elite athleticism or anything like that. As a point guard that can create for others, that's going to be something he'll be able to do. But the ramp back up period from these injuries takes a while. And so that's why this is something that the Pelicans need to prioritize, whether it's through the draft. Look, if they get the second overall pick, you would imagine that they are going to take Dylan Harper. They should take Dylan Harper, number 2 overall. Or maybe you need to look at someone like Chris Paul in free agency, but you got to wonder if a team like the Spurs will try and re-sign him. There's a lot of reasons to go after those kind of guys, but if you want to make the most of Zion Williamson next year, when you look at his net rating, as long as there's a point guard out there on the court, it doesn't matter what bigs you put with the team. So if you're trying to just maximize your chance at the playoffs, that means maximizing Zion Williamson. And if they trade him and think they're still going to be competitive, I don't know what this team is thinking at that point in time, and I don't know if that is what they're thinking. But it doesn't matter the bigs you put out there. As long as you have Zion Williamson and a point guard out there, the rest of it just kind of falls into place because Zion is that, good of a player. Now, your defense needs to get better. And, this is something that the Pelicans are going to need to think about and figure out of, could you trade Murray in a deal for a point guard? Is there a rebuilding team that wants Murray a pick for their point guard? Maybe that's an option for the team somewhere. And I wouldn't use this first round pick, even if it falls to say 8 overall, I'd still probably draft someone with that pick. So this is something that they're going to need to navigate. I think this is kind of secretly a bigger thing for the team overall than otherwise, because if you think you're going to play 3 months without your starting point guard and things are going to be just fine for you when he comes back, when he'll be on a minutes restriction and all of those things, that's not how this is going to go. Even as point Zion, and it's very much a real thing, you need another point guard. You need a point guard there to kind of help him out as well, as we've seen really from this year. And it's why they went and got DeJounte Murray. Now, DeJounte Murray just got hurt. So that's a big part of the problem. But he also wasn't good defensively. You need someone that's going to contribute on that. He's really fallen off from his days in San Antonio as a defensive kind of guy. And we'll look at someone like Jase Richardson, who's an interesting prospect in this draft, I think, because of how good he can be defensively here. But point guard, if the team wants to win games, compete at the highest level that they can compete next year, that's not probably being a title contender, but that's, making some noise in the first round, you're going to need a point guard. You're going to need a point guard. The numbers just bear it out that if you have those lineups where Zion doesn't have that, it's a big problem for the team. And the data says, get Zion a point guard. Very loud and clear. So coming up next, what if you can get a point guard, but you don't have Zion Williamson? Got a trade with Portland for you that we're going to break down. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by PrizePicks. Basketball and hockey playoffs are here, and there's no better time to turn your sports knowledge into real cash than with PrizePicks, the top destination for daily fantasy sports. PrizePicks makes it simple. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and you're in. That's it. You can even mix and match players across basketball, hockey, baseball, and more for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. 2,000 times your cash. You want Nikola Jokic for more than 25 points, Jaylen Brown for more than 4 assists? You can do it. Every lineup you make on PrizePicks will enter you into the Takes 2 Tickets sweepstakes, which could get you and a +1 to Vegas for various series here. It's awesome. So the app makes it so easy to use, and you can build a lineup in under 60 seconds. And they have constant promotions like Taco Tuesdays, Flex Fridays. There's just extra value to be had all the time. And you can get paid fast, as quick as in 15 minutes. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. Today and every day, we're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. You can go to Locked On Daily to subscribe. Get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox every single morning. So let's do a little bit of trade talk here. We haven't done this in a minute. An actual trade that kind of evolved as it was happening. I was on our Locked On Blazers podcast, Locked On Trailblazers podcast the other day to discuss what a Zion Williamson trade would look like. And I think Portland is one of those teams that played well at the end of the season. That's a little bit of fool's gold. But hey, they don't know that. So they might want to kind of hit the accelerator, hit the gas, and make a move that kind of elevates them up from where they are in kind of the Western Conference standings. And I think that type of player could be Zion Williamson. They're not going to get Kevin Durant. They're not going to get Giannis. They could get a Zion Williamson. And this might be the best opportunity they're going to have to get someone like Zion Williamson. So if that's going to be the case, right, like there's an opportunity cost to this of like, well, we could pass on Zion and wait for someone else. But if you don't, you lost your chance to get the other guy. And that might kind of force their hand. Maybe they want to try and wait a year before you kind of step on the accelerator, I'd gas to the fire, whatever cliche phrase you want to use. But is anyone going to be available that you could go and get? And the answer to that is probably no. So when I went on there, and it was kind of a revisit of a discussion we had about 2 years ago around, the Pelicans being really interested in Scoot Henderson. And what I had said on Locked On Blazers, and I said it here, was that the Pelicans very much would like to be in the Scoot Henderson business. And our Locked On Blazers host, Mike Richmond, said, is that still the case? And I was like, well, it's kind of interesting because David Griffin wanted to be in the Scoot Henderson business. I don't know if Joe Dumars wants to be in the Scoot Henderson business, but what if you can build a trade that gets you three pieces that really kind of fit things that you need? And I think the answer to that is, all right, I'm listening here. So when we were discussing what a trade would look like, and it started with just let's trade Zion. We can figure out, the other little pieces around it. It's Zion Williamson's going to need to go. And then one of DeAndre Ayton, Jeremy Grant, or Anthony Simons needs to come back to New Orleans just based off of the salaries. And so I said, pick whichever one you want. And he was like, honestly, the one that I think they'd be looking to get rid of is Jeremy Grant because of all the years left on his deal, but his contract is probably viewed as a negative. I'm like, well, if his contract's viewed as a negative, it's going to be, you're going to need a first round pick for Zion. You're going to need a first round pick to get off Jeremy Grant. And that's kind of where we're starting the conversations here. Jeremy Grant and Scoot Henderson plus 2 picks. Is that something that, Portland would be open to? And he's like, yeah, I think so. It's like, we probably want to trade DeAndre Ayton, but I don't know if New Orleans is going to be interested in that. I'm like, there's a need for a center here, but DeAndre Ayton's probably not like the center that you're looking for. But then the trade discussion evolved further of, could you maybe get out of CJ McCollum's deal in this? And is it too weird to send him back to Portland where he, played the beginning, majority of his career? And Mike Richmond was like, no, we'd bring him back. Like, there's nothing there that says no. And that's when I got kind of interested about this. And Mike Richmond proposed the trade of Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, and Jose Alvarado. Let me do this in the trade so we can kind of see how this works here. For Scoot Henderson, Jeremy Grant, and DeAndre Ayton. Now, look, anytime you can basically get 3 starters off a team that win 33 games, you should absolutely do it, right? Sorry, 36 games for Portland. You should absolutely do it. But this is kind of interesting to me because it fixes some things for New Orleans in what I would consider a pretty positive way, right? Scoot Henderson came off the bench for them the majority of last season, really kind of the majority of his now first 2 years in the NBA, but did average 13 points per game, 5 assists, does still project to be a good starting point guard, and shot better from 3 at 35%. His per 36-minute numbers here are 17.1 points per game and 7 assists, along with 2 made threes per game. Those aren't bad numbers, including 1.5 steals and 0.3 blocks. They're pretty decent numbers for a guy that, has toughness, has the work ethic, and that's what David Griffin was so interested in Scoot Henderson by. You can slot Scoot Henderson into the starting lineup for DeJounte Murray right now. You have Jeremy Grant, who can replace Zion Williamson in the starting lineup. You can move Misi to the bench and start DeAndre Ayton. So your starting lineup would look something like Scoot Henderson. At this point, you'd be looking at like Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Jeremy Grant, and DeAndre Ayton. I don't hate that lineup. I don't know exactly how competitive that team would be. And then you have DeJounte Murray on the bench, that he'll come off of it when he's ready for that sort of thing. It's intriguing. They still have kind of some of the issues of depth here in New Orleans, but it gets you a center. Jeremy Grant can be a go-to scorer that you can look to package and move later. DeAndre Ayton at this point is going to be an expiring deal in the future. So there's that. And it saves this team something like, let me see what it ends up saving them here. No, it adds about, $2 million or so to the cap. So not an insane amount of money it saves them over $2 million. I'm looking at it on the wrong side of things. It saves the team over $2 million. So it gives them breathing room to that luxury tax threshold. Plus you'd be getting 2 first-round picks, including the one likely this year, assuming that it doesn't jump into the top 4. So not only would you still have your own first-round pick, but you'd be looking at something around the 10th overall pick as well. So say you finish second and you get a Dylan Harper, you could be looking at adding someone like Derek Queen with the 10th overall pick. Right? You could look at a Jase Richardson, who we'll talk about in the next segment here, to give you some depth and more defense. Could you package those picks, say if you're 4 and 10, to go to 2 and get a Dylan Harper and help it facilitate you that way with the sort of thing? Could you get your then point guard of the future if maybe you don't believe in Scoot Henderson or want to flip Scoot Henderson and get someone like Igor Demin or one of the other point guards that are out there? I think the answer to that could be yes. Do you maybe want to look at someone like Colin Murray Boyles with the 10th overall pick if he's there and kind of get you that Draymond Green kind of player that maybe unlocks the team a little bit more? All of a sudden, it's just opened so many different opportunities and directions for the team to go in. And I like that idea. It just gives them flexibility that they are absolutely lacking in at this point. And then you could always move DeAndre Ayton or try to if you needed to. You could look at moving Jeremy Grant. It just gives you better pieces to try and flip potentially. And you'd have another future first-round pick from, the Portland Trailblazers, or you could maybe get like 4 seconds from them or something like that. If they don't have a ton of first-round picks that they can trade and things like that right now. So it's an interesting idea of what a deal could look like, in my opinion. But I think it puts Portland, maybe it depends on how you feel about Scoot Henderson, but it gives you 2 years to evaluate him a little bit more before needing to give him a sort of bigger contract when it comes down to it. And, it's been a little bit up and down for him in Portland so far. He has some good games and he has some not good games. He's not really a bust or anything like that, certainly, but he hasn't looked like the 3rd overall pick just yet. But maybe a change of scenery, giving him a more defined role for the team could go a long way towards making that a reality. And look, that team overall did play much better in the second part of this year, which is, winning games in late February, March, and April when teams aren't trying or resting guys and things are, again, a little bit weird during that period of time. You got to be careful with some of that, definitely. But in this draft, getting 2 top 10 picks sounds pretty intriguing to me. You're going to take the obvious one in the top 4, which hopefully the Pelicans have. But then it kind of opens up the possibility of a ton of different options or even trades at that point in time. And the ability to maybe make things happen in a way that didn't before for this franchise. So it's an interesting idea. What do you think about DeAndre Ayton, Jeremy Grant, Scoot Henderson for Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, Jose Alvarado? And look, you would easily take CJ out of this, remove CJ, and just do it for Jeremy Grant, and you don't need to deal with DeAndre Ayton. And maybe you just let someone like CJ expire, right? Like that trade still works. Or you could take Jeremy Grant out and put in DeAndre Ayton instead if you want to solve the kind of center spot when it comes to it. So these are all potential options for New Orleans going forward in a pretty good way to be able to just make things happen. And all of a sudden you start looking at Zion Williamson trades and they're sounding a little bit better than they would be otherwise. All it takes is one team. And maybe that team is going to be Portland because of the feeling the need to try and kind of accelerate their rebuild and get back into contention maybe sooner rather than later. So coming up next, let's look at a couple interesting prospects here in this upcoming NBA draft. We mentioned a couple of the names here. We'll look at those, maybe a few more. It's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The playoffs are here, and FanDuel has given new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. And I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorites in the playoffs or just diving into the player props too, whether it's three-pointers, steals, assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. And after the game tips off, you can still get in there. It's not just done. You didn't miss your opportunity. There's live in-game betting. The lines are always updating. Those player props are also always updating as well. And you can turn them into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com. Claim your $250 in bonus bets today. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. You want to know more about the NBA in general? The playoffs have been fun. Really, really fun. So thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night until an NBA champion is crowned. I'm on there every Friday. We're talking literally about every single game played in the association this season. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NBA Game Night on Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's switch gears to the NBA draft. We mentioned point guard's a need for the team, but maybe they address that through a trade. Scoot Henderson's one way to do it, but I don't think, maybe you just make them throw Scoot Henderson in because I would get whatever you can from Portland in a Zion Williamson trade. And while someone like David Griffin would have done that, is Joe Dumars that high on Scoot Henderson? And I think it's TBD here. Was Bryson Graham, who it sounds like is being retained, more on that in tomorrow's show, is that someone who wants to go after Scoot Henderson? All of those things are kind of up in the air right now when it comes down to it. But there's a couple of other pretty interesting players too, and I want to look at a few here. We mentioned that lack of defense from the team. Like, they fell off of a cliff last season. Again, when you're that injured, that's going to happen. And Herb Jones was injured the majority of the season, it felt like. But, could you add that defense through the draft, or at least have kind of another guy off the bench, a la Dyson Daniels, that can do some of that too? And if there's a player in there, that kind of fits some of that here, I really do think it is someone like Jase Richardson, who really is just a dude that fights hard and gives you just a defensive intensity, toughness, right? Grit that the team is lacking. Those are all kind of the buzzwords that Joe Dumars likes and is looking for when it comes to the team here. And so I wonder if Jase Richardson is a guy that could really, be on the team's radar. Now, he's not a point guard. He's more of a combo guard here. And, he's a little bit undersized at 6'3". This is someone who will still get picked on defense. But at Michigan State this past year, he looked overall pretty good. This is someone who averaged 12.1 points per game, 1.9 assists. Again, he's a combo guard, not a pure point guard. Shot the three ball at 41.2%. Free throws were 84%. 3.3 rebounds, but he also averaged basically a steal and half a block per game. The defensive intensity that you see from him there is just impressive to me. And if you're looking for someone who kind of projects like a Derek White, look at how important he is for someone to the Boston Celtics. That's kind of what you would get here, I think. He's also a very good scorer in terms of shooting and the mid-range. As long as he's shooting threes, I'm good with it here. And while he isn't like the highest volume guy, it looks like he could become that type of player. And I think when you watch him play, He'll fit around almost any star player in the NBA. He's fine shooting from three, but he's really intelligent and knows when to attack closeout. He basically does like all the off-ball things you want guys to do. He's willing to cut. He just knows like, okay, now's the time to attack. Now's the time to shoot. And just has that kind of high level, you would call it feel for the game. And that's something that he really puts out there. While not a true point guard, he does have some on-ball creation in him, particularly in the pick and roll. And if you're keeping Zion Williamson, they should be running more pick and rolls. And like, this is a dude who just is disruptive on the defensive side of the ball. He just has a high motor where he's competing all out on the defensive side of the ball there. Whether he's on ball or off ball, he's active all the time. He knows where to be. He has that high IQ. He fights through screens really well. So when a screen is set, he doesn't just die when he runs into the man setting that. He knows when to jump into the passing lanes, all of those things. You know, he is not a lead guard, so that's something that's going to hurt him here. He is undersized too, and he's not a go-to scorer, but you don't need him to be all of that. You're not taking him in the top 4, but if you have Portland's pick at 10, that's not bad. He's not like an elite athlete here, but this is someone who can go out and finish pretty well around the rim. And again, that fearlessness, that toughness that he has allows him to just attack. And he's not scared if guys are higher than him. Maybe if we'll use the 10th pick as kind of the example here, and we'll look at one more guy. That could be Igor Demin out of BYU, formerly playing in Europe, but he is someone who possesses tremendous size here at 6'9" and 19 years old. Now, it was interesting that he got worse as the season went on. He was looking to be, kind of early projections to be a top 4 or 5 pick. 10 points per game, 5.5 assists, 1.2 steals. He did not shoot the three ball or from the field well at all. 27% from three, and the free throw line is under 70%. And I think one of the things that is actively concerning about him was as the season went on and they got into conference play, he looked worse. He shot the ball worse. He scored less. All the numbers basically went down as he got into conference play, and that's what worries you. But if you're looking for a point guard, particularly with good size or just more creation, that's kind of the type of guy you might need. But the shooting, there's nothing there that looks like he will become a good shooter. But his playmaking does look pretty good. You'd be looking at, a best case scenario, of someone who's like a Josh Giddey-esque kind of player. And Giddey has looked good for the Bulls this year, regardless of what you think about him, right? He has good court vision. He can make every pass, and particularly at 6'9", you can pass over guys too and really manipulate a defense in a positive way here. He has enough athleticism that he probably projects to be at least, a good defender, or at least above average defender. But oh boy, he can't shoot. But that size, that passing ability does make him a really intriguing guy should you end up with another first round pick in this draft. I wonder if that's someone whose size you just can't kind of teach, coach. That's the thing. The shot mechanics would need to change. He needs to do a complete overhaul of that. And he doesn't really have like a go-to move himself and doesn't create space for himself, but he does for others. If you have a Zion Williamson, it should be really all that you need. Let me know what you think about Igor Demin or Jase Richardson here. Kind of interesting. Both those guys I find to be pretty interesting. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'll be back with you on tomorrow. We're going to talk Willie Green. We'll talk Bryson Graham, a couple other things. It should be a really good show tomorrow. You don't want to miss this one. See you all next time.